This is Rummy's Corner. Muhammad Ali is widely regarded as the greatest heavyweight champion of all time. On September 15, 1978, Ali avenged his earlier loss and defeated Leon Spinks by a 15-round unanimous decision. This gave Ali the unique distinction of becoming the first and only three-time lineal heavyweight champion. Ali retired on July 27, 1979, and this would be the last time that the great Muhammad Ali held a claim to a portion of the heavyweight championship. He came out of retirement twice in two losing efforts when he was well past his best. So who is the greatest heavyweight champion since Muhammad Ali? Following the end of Ali's championship reign, Larry Holmes was the man who dominated the heavyweight landscape during the late 70s and the first half of the 80s. Then Mike Tyson became the dominant force over the second half of the 80s. The early parts of the 90s were defined by the epic rivalry between Riddick Bowe and Evander Holyfield. Then during the later parts of the 90s and beyond, Lennox Lewis had become the dominant force among heavyweights. After Lewis retired, there was a brief stretch when Vitali Klitschko was viewed as the best heavyweight, followed by the long and dominant reign of his younger brother, Vladimir Klitschko. So I think the best heavyweight champion since Muhammad Ali definitely comes from that group of champions. For our purposes here, we can exclude guys like Anthony Joshua, Deontay Wilder, Joseph Parker, and Tyson Fury. I think we need to see how all of their careers progress before we can even begin to consider including them in such a discussion. And I also believe we can safely remove guys like Buster Douglas, Hasim Rahman, Shannon Briggs, Michael Spinks, Michael Moore, and old George Foreman. No disrespect meant to any of those world champions, but none of them were viewed as the best in the division for any considerable amount of time. And indeed, some of them were never even actually viewed as the best of the division at any point in time. We can also eliminate a slew of alphabet titleists over the years, of which there have been far too many to list here. So these are the 7 heavyweights in the post-Ali era whom I believe have the best claims. Larry Holmes, Mike Tyson, Evander Holyfield, Riddick Bowe, Lennox Lewis, Vitali Klitschko, and Vladimir Klitschko. So how do we rank them? If we use title defenses and longevity as the key measurement to try and determine that, then Larry Holmes and Vladimir Klitschko would top the list. There's a lot to be said about having a long and dominant reign where a champion piles up well over a dozen consecutive title defenses. It requires a level of dedication and commitment and consistency that cannot be understated when assessing boxers from across different eras. At the same time, title defenses don't tell the entire story. Holmes and Klitschko both competed in what are generally considered weaker eras in heavyweight history. In the case of Vladimir Klitschko, he understandably never faced the second best boxer from his era, that being his older brother Vitali. This prevented boxing fans from ever seeing a fight between the two best heavyweights from that era. Holmes and Vladimir also both lack a true career-defining signature victory. By comparison, looking at Riddick Bowe, he had a short reign as champion, and his prime was extremely short-lived. But Bowe competed in a much tougher era than Holmes and Vladimir, and Bowe has 2 career-defining victories, both of them against Evander Holyfield, where Bowe was the winner of the greatest heavyweight trilogy in the post-Ali era. You could also make the case that on his best day, prime for prime, that Riddick Bowe could defeat both Holmes and Vladimir. But even if you don't think that Bowe would beat those guys, Bowe certainly would have posed a bigger threat to Holmes and Vladimir than any opponent either of them defeated in either of their respective title defenses. On the other hand, surely Bowe needs to be held in a lesser regard to some degree because he lacked the dedication and the consistency and the longevity that we saw from Holmes and Vladimir. And long and dominant reigns need to count for something. If we examine the case of Vitali Klitschko, I think his situation is similar to Big Daddy Bo's. Vitali was only considered the top dog for just a fairly brief stretch, and when Dr. Iron Fist returned after his initial retirement, his brother Vladimir was considered the best. And again, we have the fact that as brothers, fans never got to see a fight between the two best heavyweights from that era. Unlike Bo, Vitali lacks a career-defining victory. His career-defining performance was in a losing effort against Lennox Lewis. That was about Vitali was winning at the time when the fight was stopped because of that bad cut. But similarly to Bo, you could make the argument that on his best day, prime for prime, that Vitali Klitschko could defeat both Larry Holmes and his brother Vladimir. Or at the very least, he would provide them with tougher challenges than anyone either of them defeated in their respective championship reigns. Mike Tyson and Lennox Lewis are also guys I think that fit into a similar situation. Neither of them had reigns at the top that lasted as long as Holmes or Vladimir's reigns, but they were both considered head and shoulders above the rest when they ruled, and they dominated for longer stretches than guys like Bo or Vitali. Lennox ruled in an era that is considered significantly better than when Tyson reigned supreme, and when Lewis and Tyson actually fought, Lewis dominated Tyson, but this was when Lewis was still at the tail end of his reign, and Lewis was more of a late bloomer, whereas Tyson utilized an explosive style relying on youthful energy. So Tyson peaked early, and Lewis peaked later. Does this matchup really give us a good indication of what a fight between Lewis and Tyson might have been like had they squared off against one another in their absolute primes? Then Tyson also has some similarities with Vitali in the sense that both of them left the division for a number of years before having a second career where neither one of them was anything close to being near peak form. Vitali's second career was far more successful than Tyson's, but it was also in a weaker era where Vitali never faced the top guy, his brother Vladimir. Then we have Evander Holyfield, and I think Holyfield is in a unique situation all around. Holyfield had several reigns, and he was arguably viewed as the very best during 3 separate stretches across the 90s. So he never had a particularly long reign, but he was still consistently fighting at the top championship level during an extremely tough era over an extended number of years. In a head-to-head sense, Holyfield holds 2 victories against Mike Tyson, a victory over an older Larry Holmes, and he was the only man to ever defeat Riddick Bowe. Officially, he also has a draw with Lennox Lewis. Holmes was clearly past his best when he faced Holyfield, and you can make the case that Prime Holmes would beat Holyfield. Mike Tyson was also past his best when he faced Holyfield. But then again, so was Holyfield. Would a fight between Holyfield and Tyson, prime for prime, would it have a different outcome? Or did Holyfield just have Tyson's number as many believe? Riddick Bowe defeated Holyfield in 2 of their 3 fights. Bowe's 2 victories were a decisive 12-round unanimous decision and a definitive stoppage victory in the rubber match. When Holyfield beat Bowe, however, it was a razor-thin majority decision that many observers felt Bowe deserved to win. But at the very least, Holyfield and Bowe were both in their prime years when they faced one another. And it's an interesting situation because Bowe was clearly the winner of their head-to-head rivalry, but Holyfield was clearly the more accomplished of the 2 on the whole. And this is somewhat symbolic of the impossible task of objectively ranking fighters across different eras. And then when Holyfield faced Lewis, Holyfield was clearly further past his best than Lennox was. So of course, there's the question of whether a fight between prime versions of Holyfield and Lewis may have had a different outcome. A lot of people think it might have been different. because of Holyfield's admirable performance in a losing effort when he rematched Lewis after their controversial draw. When evaluating these 7 heavyweight world champions, I think depending on the criteria you're using, it's difficult to rank them in a prime for prime head-to-head sense. I think you could make the case that any one of these fighters could beat any of the others on a given night. So if you somehow factor hypothetical head-to-head prime for prime situations into your rankings, then it really all just boils down to personal opinion and individual preference. At the end of the day, all we can ask of any champion in any era is to consistently face the top challenges of his day. This inherently works against the Klitschko brothers, Vitali in particular, because neither of them faced each other. But with Vladimir, he was the dominant force when his brother was out of action for nearly 4 years, and he continued being the dominant force for a few more years after his brother retired for good. So who was the greatest heavyweight champion since Muhammad Ali? If I had to rank those 7 heavyweight champions, my list would look like this. So the answer for me is Larry Holmes, the Easton Assassin. But honestly, I can see a strong case being made for Lennox Lewis. I could see some really good arguments being made for Vladimir or Holyfield. And depending on how highly you regard head-to-head comparisons, you could make an excellent case for guys like Iron Mike, Big Daddy Bo, and Dr. Iron Fist. So who do you think is the greatest heavyweight champion since Muhammad Ali? Please share your thoughts in the comments section. Thank you very much for watching, and have a great night, everyone.